Hi everyone, Stephanie Rose here from the OWLS team. I wanted to talk a little bit today about our continuous improvement roadmap and specifically around the first couple steps of defining the problem and analyzing root causes. So I have worked on these steps for a while now. I've been on staff about 7 years and always worked with regions on an org-wide strategy team of some sort, largely helping regions answer big strategic questions or solve big problems via data. So that could be internal data, looking at things like CSI and Cali. It could be external data, looking at student outcomes, things like district data, test scores. Also, I do a lot of qualitative data analysis, so focus groups and interviews and talking to people about specific issues and then kind of rolling that all up into the findings. And so what I thought might be helpful today was to talk a little bit about a specific example and kind of go through the thought process to help really everyone get a sense for what it looks like to define a problem and to analyze root causes in a specific example. So the example here is some work that our team did with the Las Vegas Valley region a little while ago. They've come to us with a big question, thinking about how to get more alums to stay in the Vegas Valley as most were leaving after either their second year or maybe their third year of teaching. And really wanted to make sure that they could deliver on the second part of our theory of change, have alums stay in regions, start schools, and really work in the fight towards educational equity locally. And so when we got this request, the question was really big. Why are alums leaving Las Vegas? How can we get them to stay? And that's a really big question, a couple of questions to answer. And so a couple of the things that I did in sort of scoping out this project were to talk to Sean and others in region to get a sense for what was behind this big question. And also, what do they already know so that we could all align on exactly what the problem was that we're trying to solve and the type of data that we would need and want to collect in order to actually answer this question in a way that could drive strategy. So I started by asking a bunch of questions. In terms of additional context here on the slide, you can see they largely fall into the buckets of who, what, when, where, why, how. I'll spare you all of the details, but basically just trying to get underneath what is the true problem we're trying to solve and what does the region already know. And so from this sort of line of questioning and having these initial conversations, got to a place where we actually could identify some hypotheses. So, by talking to core members, talking to alums, looking at survey data, the region already had a set of sort of hypotheses around why alums were leaving that we could basically pressure test and try to understand a little bit more of what's behind it or how we could potentially get people to stay. And also if there were other things we were missing, other reasons that people were leaving or motivations that we could find to get them to stay. So you can see here in the sort of upper right-hand corner, the place where we got to, we had 3 concrete things we wanted to test and they each were sort of multifaceted. And then also had sort of a catch-all bucket for anything else. What else were we hearing from people in terms of why they might be leaving or what we could do to get them to stay. And in this specific example, this was a place where, yes, we did look at some quantitative data, things like where our alums were going. Were they going back to their hometown, their home state? Was it just that Vegas wasn't near their family and friends and we think people just want to return to their home state? We also looked at different correlations. We ran some data analyses on the quantitative data, but because of the nature of this question, it was largely qualitative. So we really wanted to be able to talk to alums to get a sense for what really solidified their decision to either stay or leave the Vegas Valley, and what trends could we pull out from that could inform strategy so that the region can get a better sense for what, if anything, they can do to get people to stay. And so this example with the Vegas Valley was actually one of the inputs into one of the tools we created that's linked in the Continuous Improvement Roadmap, which is our Qualitative Research Methods Toolkit. And so what you'll find in here is some basic background, different ideas for qualitative research that you might want to perform. And also, most importantly, in my mind, are some examples and templates that you could use if you actually do want to reach out to core members, alums, host focus groups, do your own survey, etc. We have all sorts of resources so that you don't have to create them yourselves, from email outreach to trackers, and even ideas for how to analyze qualitative data. So this could be a really helpful tool if you're looking to specifically do some qualitative research for any problem or strategic question that you have. So back to the Las Vegas Valley example, we were able to speak with a wide variety of alums, and we bucketed them into focus groups based on a few factors. So recent versus older alums, because the region had changed alumni strategies over time. Also looked at alums who stayed in the region versus alums who left. Also those who may have left and come back, et cetera. And so we looked at these different buckets of alumni and talked to them separately so that we could really get underneath trends in why any specific group or person decided to stay or leave. And we did this all based on the hypotheses that we had arrived on when we did that initial sort of defining the problem step as the region and OWLS got together to talk about that. And so here on the screen, you can see some of the root causes that we identified. Some really positive things, like people who had stayed in the valley or came back, they just saw tremendous opportunity. There's such a huge need in Vegas, and also there's so much opportunity because they don't have the wealth of talent necessarily that maybe a California, LA, would have, or a New York City or DC. They're just fewer people and more opportunities. So you can, kind of get further faster. We also saw some really positive things about, alumni support from the region. And a couple of things that we got underneath in terms of why then people were leaving were, it's really hard. We heard from alums to find a community in Vegas. You come in, you have your core member community, but it was hard for people to find other young professionals, people who had lived in Vegas, they were from Vegas, they were going to stay there. And so it's sort of a domino effect. Once others in your core started leaving after your second or third year, then you had fewer and fewer friends, and you decided, it's time for me to leave as well. And so that could inform strategy, right? And it did for the region in terms of how to help people plug in to local communities, meet other young professionals, meet others in education, in order to be able to, really have people form a community that would encourage them to stay in the region. Couple other things, in terms of geography, we found some people were really enticed by the low cost of living. Others found like, I really wanted to be in a bigger city, things like that. So anyway, we were able to really get underneath the hypotheses, and then from there actually dig in on some recommendations for strategy, all because we were able to really, with the qualitative data analysis, get underneath some of the root causes for both why people were leaving, but also on the positive side, why people were actually choosing to stay, which was really helpful, to actually get data for each of those hypotheses to help the region inform their strategy. So that was just one example of how we helped to define a problem and do some analyses of root causes in order to inform strategy with a region. A few things that I've laid out on this slide actually around both qualitative and quantitative data collection and analysis is that this is really, this is a journey. You are likely going to iterate multiple times on even maybe your hypotheses. You might sharpen something based on what you're hearing. You might add a hypothesis that you want to test. But I think as long as you're really clearly tracking all of the data and you're open to that iteration, that you're not going into it thinking you're going to find something and then you're throwing out data that doesn't support that. It's an iterative process. It is time consuming, but it's definitely much more manageable if you go into it with the right mindset around, really being flexible with a story that is going to emerge and really doing a full analysis so that that story can emerge and you're not just picking and choosing the data that you want to tell the story that you're looking to tell. Some other tips and tricks are really just to probably look at both quantitative and qualitative data. Oftentimes quantitative can be done first because we can get that more easily versus setting up focus groups and conversations, interviews with stakeholders. And that can actually start to inform, the questions that you want to ask of people. So I always try to look at quantitative data first. And even there is some qualitative data we have, right, in surveys, core member and alumni surveys. Oftentimes we have lots of comments, lots of opinions. And so that could be a good place to sort of data mine before you actually get people in the room, because you do want to maximize that time. If you're asking, a group of people, alums or others, to come in and actually talk to you, you want to make sure that you have everything that you know already laid out, so that you're not asking redundant questions. And then once you have the time with alums, core members, other stakeholders, you can really make the most of the time that you have by asking new questions, getting really far down into like the root causes, and really testing your hypotheses in a way that the quantitative data just might not allow you to do. So I hope that this was somewhat helpful in just giving an example and sort of a voiceover of a couple of the steps in the roadmap. If you have any questions, I am definitely happy to connect. We do have an OWLS intake form, and there are a lot of linked resources. If you click on any of these sort of red bubbles here, that can get you even deeper into making sure you're really, really clearly defining your problem, getting crystal clear among all of the stakeholders in the room that are working on this together. And then also from there, getting really, really deep on the root causes. Something like alumni are leaving because, they don't like it here is not nearly as helpful as understanding that, hey, alums are leaving my community because they're not able to connect and really get a sense of community here because they're only talking to other core members. The second option is much more actionable. You can take steps to address that versus if you just think, oh, people are leaving, they don't like it here. So that's the sort of distinction that a lot of these tools and resources, especially in the analyze root cause piece of the roadmap, can help you distinguish and sort of get underneath. But again, we're always happy to help with this, consult with you if you have a strategic question that you are trying to answer. So please reach out to OWLS if you do. Thank you.